In my last video, I shared 5 ways that I'm using AI in my business to save time and make more money. That was more tactical. So in this video, I'm going to share the bigger picture way that I think AI is helping to overcome one of the biggest challenges that all web design agencies face. Hi, thanks for joining. If you're new to this channel, I'm Rich Dean, a web designer and developer, former web agency owner and author of the book series Start, Grow and Sell Your Web Design Agency. My goal is to help anyone looking to start, grow and sell an agency to save time, earn more money, avoid the common mistakes and pitfalls, and build a thriving and valuable business. Okay, so before I share this big insight, I want to give you some context around my background, how I started and grew my agency, and the challenges that I faced. Now, bear with me, I don't just want to bore you with my backstory. This is all relevant for how AI is becoming so important. What I'm also going to do is break down this video into key lessons and insights that I learned along the way. My background. So, first and foremost, I'm a designer. I went to art college and I started my career 25 years ago as a graphic designer. I've always been quite a visual, creative person, but I've also learned to become a very good developer. I can design and build websites. I got into web design a couple of years into my career, so probably around 2002, 2003. Back then, things were quite a lot simpler. I only worked for a very small agency. We didn't have any proper developers. So I had to design and develop the websites myself using very basic HTML table-based layouts, which is a very old-fashioned way of building websites. We didn't use content management systems. They weren't really a thing back then. And I didn't even use CSS. So it was all very basic. A couple of years later, I did start using CSS, which was a big improvement. And then a couple of years after that, I veered off into building websites using Flash, which was really fun until the iPhone kind of killed off Flash. So then around 2009, 2010, I got back into HTML-based web development using what was then the still relatively new HTML5, CSS2, and jQuery, basically the earlier versions of what has now become the default way that we build websites. I also started to dabble in PHP and WordPress, but in a very basic way. A couple of years later, around 2013, I knew that I was going to start my own agency, and I also knew that I would be doing it on my own. This meant that I needed to be able to fully design and build websites for my clients, including making sure they were all CMS driven. So I knew I needed to build my skills in WordPress and PHP. I didn't want to use off-the-shelf themes. I wanted to be able to fully develop custom WordPress themes so that I could have full control over what the websites did. But I was really fortunate because at the time I worked with some really talented and knowledgeable WordPress developers. So before I quit my main job to start my agency, I was able to pick their brains and get a really good basic understanding of how to build custom WordPress websites. My first big challenge. That was enough to get me started, but I don't think anything could have prepared me for just how challenging and complicated it all turned out to be. I had to do a lot of figuring out and learning on the job. The coding skills I needed to create custom websites were really complex, more than what I thought they would be, and there were just things that I didn't know how to do. I needed to do a lot of researching and figuring out. And there were times when this was really stressful. I didn't have any developers to call on, and there was only so much Googling and looking on Stack Overflow that I could do. So there were times when I just burnt so many hours and wasted so much time trying to get things to work. I always found a way to do it, and the websites I delivered were always of a really high standard. But I think if you looked back at my code, it probably wasn't always the best, and it was quite often a struggle just to get there. So just before we go any further though, please don't forget to like and subscribe. This really helps us to grow the channel so we can keep creating helpful content just like this. Okay, back onto the main topic, growing pains. Despite all the challenges, the business did really well and I started to grow. So after a couple of years, I started to employ people. And specifically, I started to bring in some really good experienced developers. My thinking was I can just get them to do all the complex work as they can do it better than I can. But it didn't always work out that way. What I found was, even though my developers were more experienced than I was, they would still get stuck. There were still complex things that we needed to figure out, but that would still take them a lot of time and prove challenging. All that was basically happening was we were growing and taking on bigger and more complex projects and employing more technically experienced people, but we were still getting stuck trying to figure things out, the unknown. This led me to one of my first really big insights, which is that no matter what kind of projects we were working on, and no matter who was working on them, there was always an unknown element. There were always complex things that we would need to figure out, but it was really hard to know how we would go about it, how long it would take, and therefore how much it would cost. This is a major issue for all agencies, and it led me on to my next big insight: commercial conflict. The reason this is challenging for pretty much all agencies is because it creates a friction or conflict between how an agency needs to run commercially and what clients expect versus how the work is done. Pretty much all clients want fixed costs. This means that when they come to you for a website, they'll want you to give them a cost for that website and then stick to it. So when you're scoping and quoting for that website, you basically need to work out how much work will be involved, how long it would take you, and therefore how much it will cost, which is usually based on something like an hourly or daily rate. There are other ways that you can cost websites, but that's the way that most agencies do it. But when you come to actually do the work, if there are things that turn out to be more complex and take more time, that costs you money. If you've given your client a fixed cost, you can't go back to them and tell them they need to pay you more money. Now, don't get me wrong, if a client asks for something that wasn't in the original scope, then it's fair that you should charge extra for that. Or if you have something that you already know could be challenging, then you could agree to only do the work based on a range rather than the fixed cost. But in general, if you give clients a fixed cost based on timings that you've come up with, you can't go back to them and say, sorry, we're going to have to charge you more because we got our timings wrong. It just doesn't work like that. The big challenge. So the big challenge that all agencies face is that if a project ends up being more complex than originally planned, it can be costly. Put simply, if you or your developers take more time on something, that can cost you money. It's time that you could be spending on other paid projects. If you quoted, say, 10 hours for something, but it ends up taking 20 hours, you're still only being paid for 10 hours, which means any extra time is basically being given away for free. This was a constant challenge when I ran my agency, and from speaking to other agency owners, it seems like this is a major issue across our industry, at least until AI came along, which I'll get into in a minute. Going back to when I just started my agency and I was working on my own, I used to burn so much time getting stuck on things and trying to figure out how to get something to work. Don't get me wrong, it helped me to improve my skills and become a better developer, but it also meant that projects that were meant to take this long actually ended up taking this long, and it often meant that I would lose money on projects because I didn't quote enough time. This carried on even as I grew my agency and employed people. Not only was it costly, but it was also really stressful. It was stressful going through the process of figuring things out, but it also creates this big uncertainty. And it's this uncertainty that I think AI can have the biggest impact on. How AI is solving this uncertainty. So this really is the big insight in this video. I sold my agency a couple of years ago, and since then I've been doing a few different things, but I've also carried on working as a freelance web designer and developer, and I'm currently working on some fun projects for a couple of clients. I'm working on my own again, so I don't have any developers to call on, but I found that I also don't need to. I'm using ChatGPT more and more in my workload, and to be honest, I am blown away by how effective it is. Don't get me wrong, I'm still doing most of the development work myself and I still enjoy it. But before, where I may have struggled for hours trying to figure something out, now when I get stuck, when I just need some help building something complex, I just ask ChatGPT and it does most of the work for me. It's literally like having the world's most experienced expert developer on hand to help me out whenever I need it. I'm using it almost on a daily basis. It's not 100% effective. There have still been a couple of times where I haven't been able to get something to work, but for probably 98% of the time, it just works. And it's given me three very clear benefits. One, it's saving me so much time. Tasks that could have taken me hours now take minutes. Two, it means I can build things that I wouldn't have been able to, at least not without the help of an expert developer. And this one thing is probably the most important aspect. Three, the quality is so much better. Even if I could have built something myself, ChatGPT writes the code in a much more expert way. So I think the big challenge that this overcomes for agencies is removing that unknown, removing that question of how can we achieve something? Can we even achieve something? With tools like ChatGPT, you can now have much more certainty and confidence. And I think this will have a profound implication for how agencies are run and structured. And it may even mean agencies completely rethink how they work and how they build their teams. So hopefully you found this video useful and it helps you to think about ways you can use AI to make your agency work better. If you've enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. This will really help us to grow the channel so we can carry on making helpful content just like this. And I also discuss topics like this in my book series, Start, Grow and Sell Your Web Design Agency, which you can purchase on Amazon now, and I'll share a link in the description below. And if you'd like to watch more informative content, then why not check out this video here. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.